Have you ever cooked tofu hoping for golden, crispy edges, but ended up with something pale, soggy, or falling apart in the pan? If that sounds familiar, you are definitely not alone. Tofu can be one of the most delicious ingredients in your kitchen, but only when you treat it the right way. Welcome back to the Home Cook Bible, where we make home cooking easier, smarter, and more delicious. Today, we're talking about one of the most common kitchen frustrations: how to make tofu crispy every time. Because once you understand a few simple rules, tofu stops being bland and soft in a bad way and starts becoming crispy, flavorful, and something you'll actually crave. By the end of this video, you'll know exactly why tofu fails to crisp, what type to buy, how to prep it properly, and the small details that make a huge difference. Let's start with the real problem. Tofu is full of water, and water is the enemy of crispiness. When tofu has too much moisture, it steams instead of fries. That means instead of forming a golden crust, it stays soft, wet, and sometimes rubbery. So if your tofu is never getting that restaurant-style texture, it usually is not because tofu is bad. It is because there is still too much moisture in it, or the cooking method is working against you. Another common mistake is moving the tofu too early. A lot of people keep stirring, flipping, and poking it because they think it's sticking or burning. But crispy tofu needs time to develop a crust before you touch it. And one more issue: overcrowding the pan. When tofu pieces are packed too close together, they trap steam. Steam prevents browning, so even if your heat is good, your tofu still won't crisp properly if the pan is overloaded. So the three big enemies are too much water, too much movement, and too much crowding. The first step to crispy tofu is choosing the right type. If you want crisp edges and a firm bite, go for firm or extra firm tofu. These types contain less water and hold their shape much better during cooking. Soft or silken tofu has its place. It's great for soups, sauces, smoothies, and creamy dishes, but it is not what you want for that crispy golden result. So if you're standing in the grocery store wondering why your tofu never turns out the way you want, check the label first. Extra firm tofu is usually your best friend for crispiness. Now let's talk about the step that changes everything: pressing. If you skip pressing, you are already making crispy tofu harder than it needs to be. To press tofu, remove it from the package, drain the liquid, and wrap the block in paper towels or a clean kitchen towel. Then place something flat on top like a plate or cutting board and add some weight like a pan or a few cans. Let it sit for about 20 to 30 minutes. What this does is push excess water out of the tofu so it can actually brown instead of steam. If you cook tofu often, a tofu press can make this easier. But honestly, you do not need special equipment. A towel, a plate, and a little weight already make a big difference. And if you're really in a rush, even pressing it for 10 to 15 minutes is better than not pressing at all. After pressing, cut your tofu into the shape you want. Cubes are common, but don't underestimate triangles, slabs, or torn chunks. In fact, torn tofu can get especially crispy because the rough edges create more texture and more surface area for browning. That's a great trick if you want tofu that looks a little more rustic and grabs sauce really well later. Whatever shape you choose, keep the pieces fairly even so they cook at the same rate. Now here's one of the best tricks for crispy tofu every time. Coat it lightly in starch. A little cornstarch, potato starch, or even arrowroot can help create a thin, crispy layer on the outside. You do not need to bury the tofu in a thick coating. Just toss the pressed tofu pieces lightly with a small amount until they look dry and lightly dusted. This helps absorb any surface moisture and encourages a crisp shell during cooking. You can also season the starch with a little salt, pepper, garlic powder, or paprika if you want extra flavor. But don't go too heavy with wet marinades before crisping, because too much moisture can work against the crust. That's a mistake many people make. They marinate tofu heavily, then wonder why it won't crisp. If you want the crispiest result, either use a light seasoning first and sauce it later, or marinate briefly and pat the surface dry before cooking. Now, let's get to the cooking part. For pan frying, heat a skillet over medium to medium-high heat and add enough oil to coat the bottom well. Once the oil is hot, place the tofu in the pan in a single layer. Then leave it alone. This part matters. Let it sit undisturbed long enough to form a crust. If you try to flip it too soon, it may stick or tear. But once a crust forms, it usually releases much more easily. Cook each side until golden and crisp. then turn gently. And remember, do not overcrowd the pan. If needed, cook in batches. It may feel slower, but it gives much better results. Now, if you want an easier hands-off method, the oven is a great option. Spread pressed, lightly oiled, starch-coated tofu on a lined tray and bake it until the outside is golden and crisp. Flip halfway through for even color. And if you have an air fryer, that works beautifully too. It gives tofu a crisp exterior with less oil and less mess. So whether you pan fry, bake, or air fry, the rule stays the same. Dry tofu, enough space, enough heat, and enough patience. Here is another key detail people often miss. Add sauce after the tofu is crispy, not before. If you toss tofu and sauce too early, the coating softens and the crust disappears. So the best move is to crisp the tofu first, then toss it quickly in sauce right before serving. That way, you keep some texture while still getting all the flavor. This is especially important for dishes like sweet chili tofu, sesame tofu, orange tofu, or spicy garlic tofu. Crisp first, sauce second. If you want one simple formula to remember, here it is. Buy firm tofu, press it well, coat lightly in starch, cook without crowding, sauce at the end. That's the crispy tofu formula. Once you do those 5 things consistently, tofu becomes so much more reliable. So, how do you make tofu crispy every time? It's not about luck. It's about moisture control, the right tofu, a light starch coating, proper heat, and letting the tofu cook long enough to build a crust. When you get it right, tofu becomes golden on the outside, tender inside, and good enough to win over even people who think they do not like tofu. If you found this helpful, subscribe to the Home Cook Bible for more practical kitchen tips, easy cooking guides, and better home cooking results. And in the comments, tell me this: do you prefer your tofu pan-fried, baked, or air-fried? Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.